Washington's earned a big commitment from four-star wide receiver Raiden Vines-Bright.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And Lars, some good news to start the day for our everydayers is on Monday morning, four-star wide receiver Raiden Vines-Bright, who was originally from Corona del Sol High School in Arizona, who transferred to IMG Academy in Florida, did announce his commitment to Washington. This is something you and I hinted at a little bit on our Monday show. We were just kind of like, hey, and obviously we weren't the only ones hinting at it, as crystal balls are rolling in. He moved his official visit up almost a month and a half to be able to come to campus this past weekend and take in spring practice. And it just all seemed like it was in the cards. And Lars, the more you watch this kid's film, the more one thing stands out, and that is he can absolutely fly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing to consider is there's a difference between track speed, which he also has, and then football speed, right? Where it's like, you could run 100 yards, even straight or just 5 degrees off, but can you actually then, with the helmet on, can you actually, run good routes, run crisp routes? And I think that's the important thing to consider with this is he has the kind of football tangible IQ of knowing the route tree. Again, he's not by any means polished with the route tree, but I think he knows certainly enough, especially in the slot, to kind of come in and maximize that speed. Where because we could throw a bunch of guys in the slot that are fast, so to speak, and
sure,
we've seen guys kind of struggle with that, right? Because it's like, oh well, there's a difference between running an actual crisp route and just being fast, right? So I think when you combine both of those together and you think about what we've seen kind of in spring ball from Jedd Fisch's offense, but either way, whether it's a mesh concept or not, there's plenty of potential for Raiden Vines-Bright in this offense. And I think what we talked about kind of before the show was like, how do you start the receiver class, right? Because they're taking at least 3. Potentially they could take 4 depending on whatever happens down the road. But I would say just conservative bet 3. How do you want to start the class off? And to your point, when he originally was going to visit at the end of May, right? That big weekend in May. And now you have your remaining 3 top receiver targets coming in that weekend with Vines-Bright already in the class. And so even if he wants to come up for an unofficial or do whatever, he can now say, hey, this is what we get to work with to start out the class. Now, how do you want to complement the class? Because dealer's choice on the rest of the 3.
Absolutely. And that, the guys that we've talked about as those big 3 now is Andrew Marsh being the big one from Texas, and then Chris Lawson and Philip Bell, both from California, where Marsh feels like a little bit more of a long shot than the other 2 at this point in time, but they're still all really, really intriguing targets. But the one thing that I really want to harp on is just where Vines-Bright is right now. Where the first thing I noticed when we saw him in person over the weekend is that he's a lot more filled out, just kind of in terms of his frame, than he appeared to be on his junior tape. And it's clear that he's added some weight. He's added some muscle to his frame. And if he's able to continue doing that while retaining the speed that he has, he's going to be a really, really fun player to watch, both on the inside and on the outside. I feel like the best comp I can make right for where he is right now is kind of a souped up version of what Audric Harris is. Where when you watch Audric Harris, you see a whole lot of speed and not necessarily the full level of the route tree where that is right now, where I was talking with our buddy Ben Glassmeyer, who wrote a fantastic breakdown of Vines-Bright's film over on Huskies Wire. And one of the things that he said was right now he runs 3 routes. He runs a slant, he runs the go, and he runs the sluggo. And that's about it. And I was like, yeah, no, that's totally fine. And one of the things he went on to talk about was Vines-Bright's hip flexibility and just the way he's able to dip and get in and out of some of these breaks and the way he's able to move in space. And those are all signals of a future elite route runner. And, that's something when you talk about Washington, you can talk about Kevin Cummings, who's done a fantastic job coaching up guys like he did at Arizona when, we point to Tyrone McMillan, we point to Jacob Cowlings, to Dorian Singer, and look at those guys and say, yeah, he did a really good job developing them. And Vines-Bright can be another player in that mold who's got the athleticism, who's got the flexibility, who's got the speed to kind of be an inside-outside threat, do a lot of different things, line up all over the formation, and just be a future. I really don't want to say super high volume guy, but if he's somebody who pulls in 40, 50, 60 catches a year, I can't say that that's something that would surprise me.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think you hit kind of the nail on the head. It's 50. I would put the over under every year at 50. Once again, after his freshman year, once he kind of gets going in the program, right? Because when we think top end in the slot, it's kind of Jalen McMillan, right? He was that one player over the past couple of years that in the slot, especially, not that he can't be an outside guy, but just they both have similar frames. That 6 foot, 6'1" frame, slender, 175, 185. You don't want him to get too bulky, right? Because to your point, he has filled out, but you don't want to get into that 195, 210 range, because then at that point in the slot, you're not as effective, right? Where you're maybe potentially slowing down a bit and not maximizing that speed that he has. But I do like the Audric Harris comparison, because we've seen him in spring ball where he's got that kind of breakaway speed, right? Where I think that's the important thing to kind of circle back to my initial point, where you can have the straight line speed in terms of what John Ross used to do, right? Where he would just 3 seconds later, he's 60 yards down the field, and now you're kind of just waiting there, lighting the cigar, trying to wait for the ball to come down. It's like with Vines-Bright, it seems like he knows the timing with it. He knows, and it's kind of imagine Damon Williams with Raiden Vines-Bright.
Because I'm glad you said that, because they played 7-on-7 ball together, so they do have a little bit of a relationship. And one of the things that Vines-Bright said when he committed was that he gave a shout out to Damon, and it kind of feels like that this is something where he's a player that a lot of some of those Arizona guys have gravitated towards. And it's just really cool that you said that. I'm sorry, I just wanted to get that in there, because having that chemistry and just some of that relationship already with one another is something that can only be more fun to watch at the college level.
Right, exactly. And not just for 7-on-7, but I feel like in 11-on, their skills complement each other so well, where you had a quick receiver in the slot. And we've seen how quick Damon is with his decision making, especially in those intermediate to 10 to 15 to 25 yards, where that ball is coming out pretty quick. You can imagine the tempo of Jedd, whether or not Jedd Fisch wants to play with tempo. You can just imagine already how that offense can look. And again, it's different than what Kalen DeBoer ran, but it's almost, for lack of a better term, better, right? Because it's what Jedd Fisch wants to do with the scheme, and that's why. Another thing, I'm glad you mentioned that relationship. One other player that reacted to hit Vines-Bright's commitment was Elijah Pratt, the safety from who I believe is also at IMG, originally from, I believe, Texas, right? I want to say, but he's gonna also play at IMG like Vines-Bright this coming fall. And again, we've kind of speculated, well, where does Elijah Pratt really stand on that? Well, again, anytime you can get some of these guys who are coveted by other schools, you're going to notice, hey, there's a little bit of overlap, whether there's a relationship here, a connection there, teammates here and there. That can only help Washington when it comes to recruiting some of these other guys. And you have to imagine when you're building out a receiver class, I mean, last year's was a perfect example where Roma Dunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Poe, they're all like, yeah, they want to be the guy, but get all 3 or 4 of those guys in a room, get them on the same field together, and just let them figure it out on the field. Like great players want to play with great players. And so this isn't like, oh, now they got to take a safer take here. It's like, no, they're closing on other top players with the help of some of these guys that they're getting in the boat. I mean, think of Dash Beerley playing at
Modern Day,
right? Where it's like all these relationships that these kids have, whether it's 7-on-7 or playing at their high school, that only benefits Washington down the line.
Absolutely. And that's something where, quick thing to note, where this is going to be a really big class, where it sounds like there might be as many as 25 players in this class for just with, some of the roster turnover, some of the other things. So there are going to be a lot of talented guys in this class. And the more that you can get like Vines-Bright, who right now, depending on where you look, high 3, low 4-star to mid 4-star, depending on what service you look at, there are going to be a lot more guys like this in this class. And it's just fun to see what's going to happen. And Lars, that being said, they're going to be replacing some of these players in the transfer portal that could be coming in. Let's get into some of that, because the transfer portal is officially open. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because it's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, and you can do that all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And Lars, before we move on, we've also got another new sponsor to talk about. We got to give a shout out to our good friends over at Monopoly Go, because I've been told that I'm a competitive person. Lars, do you think that's true?
Yeah. fantasy sports, pretty much anything. We'll be like, hey, I have that take too. It's like, there's always a little bit of competitiveness in us.
Me? No, never. No, yeah, of course. Well, yeah, I have a competitive side. We all do. My competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, but now I can also rob their vaults for riches myself, and the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. I'm glad you get to shout out my competitive side there. I know when, I'm sitting there adjusting my fantasy football team in the fall, you're just like looking at me and just like, man, you look like an absolute psycho. And you know what, Lars? I know that. I get that aspect. But with that being said, Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff, they're also going to be pretty competitive in the transfer portal. We talked about Marcus Bryant, the offensive tackle from SMU, who visited over the weekend. I know you and I think right now that there's a really good chance that Washington will land a commitment from him. But now that the transfer portal is open, and we're recording this on Monday afternoon, since it doesn't open till 9:00 Pacific for and midnight Eastern on Monday night, Tuesday morning, whatever you want to say. We're going to see a lot more players come in. And the one thing that everybody's been talking about, just up and down the West Coast, especially a name that we will not mention here on the show, has been talking about what might be coming from Arizona, where there could be 3, 4, or 5 guys making the trek, just like a whole bunch of guys did after Jedd Fisch took the job. And, aside from some of the really, really big names, is there anybody you expect that might enter their name in the transfer portal, or you'd like to see enter their name?
I mean, that's kind of hard because it's like, who would you rather have to be a free agent right now? If you just go through all your 32 NFL teams, would you pick George Kittle? Would you pick X, Y, and Z? Well, it's like, yeah, there's certain players obviously I think that you would like from other schools, but I think there's always kind of the unsung players, right? The players that nobody really heard about coming in. Was Brian Parham? Again, he was a popular name, right? But he wasn't like a super well-known name. If he ends up going on to be a significant contributor, right? Or I think Jabbar Muhammad, that might be a better example from last year, right? Where you bring in a starter from somewhere else, a little bit different than Ephesians Frystock, where again, he's coming from his coaching staff, so we all kind of know about that. I think for me, it's more or less the positions than it is who. And again, besides the offensive line, I think there's probably going to be a couple spots on defense, but I am also curious, do you take another running back? Kind of what happens there? Quarterback, obviously, they're not touching because, again, if you're adding a fourth quarterback into this mix that's not a true freshman next year, maybe there's like a junior college guy like that. Again, there's always the random transfers. And I will say, the one thing to consider, they're working with probably 5 to 10 scholarships right now, probably closer to 10.
Yeah, something in that range. So one thing I will say, I do expect them to take another running back. There's one name where, we'll kind of see what happens. I won't put the name out there just yet, but there's a name I have on very good authority that is looking around and is very heavily considering Washington, who is somebody that was really high on them a couple of months ago. And I'll just leave it at that for right now. But I'm really curious to see what that particular player does, because it sounds like Washington is very high on his list. And, Takario Davis is the other one that I'm really, really curious about from Arizona. And this is outside some of the obvious names where, like, you're absolutely right. Of course, yeah, if you can add a George Kittle, somebody like that, it's always fun living in that world where, yeah, of course we want to see Tyrone McMillan come to Washington. That'd be awesome, especially what we've seen from Denzel Boston, Jeremiah Hunter. That'd be a fantastic third. We know that's not going to happen. But with that being said, one person who I am going to be keeping my eye on is Raiden Polito, one of their offensive linemen who did put his name into the transfer portal. I'm not saying anything by this. I don't want to put out there that, like, I'm saying, I hear he's entering the portal. I'm not going to say one way or the other, but that's just a name that I'm really interested in, because obviously the staff was really interested. He was certainly mulling coming to Washington after entering the portal in January, just kind of looking around, doing everything that he did. But if he does so again, I feel like Washington might be the destination. And that's just a name that I'm going to keep an eye on because that's a position of need right there, just on the interior of the offensive line.
Right. And I think the other thing, I don't necessarily have a specific player. Again, Raymond Polito obviously makes a lot of sense. There's maybe a couple other Arizona offensive linemen where, again, shoot, right? If you can get them out of the portal, but then again, you also don't want your coaches to be investigated down the line for, intangible contact. Hey, you guys want to come the second time around, that sort of thing. So I'm not suggesting that. Sorry, that was just for somebody down in Arizona that thinks that's the thing that happens. But with that being said, how do they stack? Because again, Brendan Carroll, as I mentioned on Monday's show, suggested about 5 or 6 offensive linemen coming in the spring portal. Well, you can only start 5 offensive linemen, and we're already basically counting you as a party. We'll just slay at right tackle, so you only need 4 starters, right? So that means they're still looking for 2 or 3 more bodies, even in reserves. So how do you stagger the class, right? Because probably at center you want to take a grad transfer, or maybe at worst a junior/senior with 2 years of eligibility, right? Ideally, you kind of want that one, because again, you still have Landon Hatchett, who, whether he's ready or not by September, October, if he can play 4 games, that's cool, but that should be all he plays this year. So you get that redshirt year back that he probably should have had last season, which again was forced upon because of other injuries. Mateo Melee, we don't need to go down that road. But with that being said, and that's not Mateo's fault. I'm just saying,
you're right. That's just what happened.
Right, but when you look at that, okay, you don't want to then stunt Landon's growth, and they've obviously been working Michael Watkins and to a degree Zach Henning at center. Zach Henning probably not going to be your long-term center. So how do you stagger the progression so you're not stunting and backstacking the offensive line classes, but also not just getting 5 or 6 one-year rentals and saying, we'll figure it out down the road? Because I have to imagine you probably want maybe 1 or max 2 grad transfers, right? Because your resume already has another year after this year. There's a couple of players that have plus eligibility beyond this season. You just don't want to get 5 or 6 grad transfers because that's not exactly what you want in terms of a depth progression.
You're absolutely right. So I was doing just a little bit of math, a little bit of just kind of looking into it, where I think that you can take 3 grad transfers, or you can take a center. You can take 1 interior lineman, because I still expect guard Lars to fill up the other one by the time fall camp rolls around. And you can take a tackle. And I think the tackle is going to be Marcus Bryant. So that leaves you with 2 spots. And again, we're going to see how this all plays out over the next week, over the next 2 weeks. But you can only take 3. And then you take a couple of guys where, let's say they're, and his name is escaping me, the guy who transferred from Northwestern to Arizona, where he had 4 years of eligibility remaining as a redshirt freshman. And it was, we can take a guy like that and then let the room play out, where there are a whole lot of redshirt freshmen and true freshmen in the room right now at Washington, where it can be the same exact thing, where it's, all right, we're going to feel a lot more comfortable getting some of these guys into the rotation next year after they've had some time, under their belts. And if you take a guy like that, you're also developing Paki Finau, you're developing Justin Hilkema and Michael Watkins, as you said, where all of those guys can then compete for some of these open spots that are going to be left by the grad transfers next year. And then, of course, you can factor in Landon Hatchett, as you said, as a redshirt as well. But Lars, we also need to talk about the defensive line, because that's going to be another place where they're going to take at least 1 body. I don't think they'll take more than 1 defensive tackle, but I know you have a really good relationship with Philip Blidi, and just, is there anything new that you might be hearing on that front?
No, obviously he had his second official visit to LSU this past weekend. The next visit, he actually I guess there is a bit of update technically. He did make public that he is taking an official visit to Auburn whatever the 15th to the 17th is of April. So
today's the 15th.
Right, I was going to say. Right, no, I was going to say no, because that was the caveat, was he was going to kind of quick sneak in that official visit before going to Oklahoma on the 19th. And then after that, I think he's pretty much going to give it about a week, let's just say, give or take, and then make his decision. And I do think Washington, again, the important thing for Washington in that regard was getting in on that first visit and then kind of circling back around, right? You kind of having those relationships, because again, you can think about Bill Belichick, but after you've gone through the washer of LSU, Oklahoma, Auburn, now you kind of got to not hose them off, right? But kind of just like, hey, don't forget about us. Our first visit, it was really good. You really liked it. Checked all the boxes. Just make sure you're thinking about all those decisions and not just going with the latest. And I don't think Philip is that kind of person, which is why I do think in the end, Washington will be the where he ends up, at least until something changes in that regard. but it is still worth considering. He's got that important visit to Auburn and then to Oklahoma. So the fact that he decided to not take a visit to A&M, I think is important. So that got to take the wins where you can get them, but I think you still got to wait till you get through the Oklahoma visit to truly know what he's thinking.
Absolutely. And that's something where we wanted to talk about that because we're going to get into the pass rush as well. But that's something where we know that one more strong body is needed at defensive tackle. And, we've seen Alinius Davis have a couple of nice plays this spring. Javon Parker has really come along. We like Sebastian Valdez, but there's a spot for one more guy. When, we talk about Jacob Bandis, Armand Parker, one more body is severely needed. And not like and I don't mean this, in a Voight Tanufi way where Voy is an undersized, can fill a certain role. No, you want a bigger, can actually play on all three downs kind of guy where you don't necessarily want Voy playing defensive tackle against the run. You love him out there as a pass rusher, but he's not going to be out there to defend the run, and you need somebody else in that mold. And Philip Blidi would be a perfect person to kind of fill that role. And if he does end up going elsewhere, I'm going to be really curious to see what they do at that position. But Lars, with that being said, we did talk about the pass rush a little bit, and it could be a strength of this Husky team this year. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at LinkedIn, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is a tool to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job. It might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. And that's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the hiring process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockdowncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockdowncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, Lars, the more we watch this pass rush, I think the more excited we're starting to get about it. And obviously, it starts with a couple of guys that have suffered just a couple of injuries over the course of practice, being Zach Durfee and Maurice Himes. We haven't gotten any kind of update, but we did see both of them walk off practice at different points. Maurice didn't practice on Saturday. We'll see what Zach's status looks like next week. But behind them, we've seen a lot of really, really impressive players. Lance Holtzclaw and Jacob Lane have been running a lot with the second team. And then there's also Russell Davis and Isaiah Ward, the two Arizona edge transfers. And I really like what I've seen from all four of them. And with knowing what we're going to get from Steve Belichick's scheme, which you and I talked a lot about on Monday show as well, I think that the pass rush can go from being something where the Huskies were last in the Pac-12 last year in sacks. I don't necessarily it's going to be all of a sudden think that they're going to be the top 10 nationally or anything like that. But I think it's going to be an underrated aspect of this team.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you mentioned the Belichick point of this, because the one thing that I've kind of noticed, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, is they're all four different types of players, right? Where even when you add Voight Tanufi into that mix, where they all kind of do something a little different. I mean, Isaiah Ward and Russell Davis are not the same player, right? Like they both came from Arizona, but we've seen Isaiah Ward do some stuff where probably should have said on the other show last week, where it's, oh yeah, now I can see how he's related to Bobby Wagner. I remember you had that. Yeah. I'm going to give you full credit for you. You were the one that said that, because I was like, how did we not get that on the show? Maybe we did, and I just forgot about it, but I don't think we did. But yeah, there's just certain things that, exactly. And I was like, how do we not get this in? Because when you said it, it's like when you said it, it was like, yeah. Makes perfect sense. Totally see it.
I feel like we should give a little bit more backstory here, because Isaiah Ward got out on a screenplay, ducked under an offensive lineman, and had to wrap up and throw down Jonah Coleman for a loss of 2 or 3 on a screen. And it was just so impressive. He's such a fluid athlete. And it's why you've alluded to it a little bit, where he's lined up on the edge. He's moved out a little bit, where there are certain plays where he just kind of trails guys off into different parts of the formation. And it's just fun to see that kind of athlete on the edge.
Exactly. And that's the key right there. It's like he's not a linebacker. He's an edge, right? I think that's why when you think about what Lance Holtzclaw can do with the one shot, one kill kind of mindset, they're still even a little bit different than that, where I'm not saying Lance can't drop into coverage, but I could almost see Lance coming up on a stunt up the middle more so than I can having him go be in man coverage. Not that, again, maybe he develops that part of his game. I just don't think more or less to your point about there's so many different types of bodies and Belichick's way of using them. I don't think they need to ask all those guys to do all those things. You just ask Lance to do 2 or 3 things. You ask Isaiah Ward to do 2 or 3 things that are different from what Lance is. And you do that with each player. Now, all of a sudden, your scheme flexibility, you can match up against any team in the Big Ten. And again, for every Ohio State, Michigan, et cetera, and Jonathan Smith, similar kind of mindset with a wide open offense to a degree. You also have Iowa, where it's, hey, we're going to punt 9 times, so you got to have like the old 46 defense, if you will. But it won't be that bad. But still, having all those different types of bodies allows you to do more things and be confident in doing them. Because if you're asking Lance to go do a man coverage and you know that's a weakness of his, okay, well, why are we doing that? I'm all for getting kids game reps to get them better, but in all these games that matter, especially when it comes to conference play in the Big Ten, you want to have those guys dialed in on their assignments so they're not trying to learn on the fly, as it were.
I see where you're going with that. I was thinking about a lot of this conversation in a very different light, where when I look at it, one guy who I'm really curious about, we talked about Isaiah Ward, but I feel that we haven't talked enough about Jacob Lane, where he's somebody who obviously the previous coaching staff burned his red shirt as a freshman. He played a lot on the interior. They lined him up on the outside. I wrote about him a little bit in something I wrote about just the Belichick defense the other day, where he could play a similar role to what Dietrich Wise does, where he lines up anywhere from just in the 3 tech in a 4-point stance all the way outside of the wide 9, where he can do a little bit of everything. And that's kind of what we've seen a little bit from Lane this spring, where they've had him a little bit more confined to the outside. But he's somebody where it's something where we talked about this with Peyton Waters last week, right? Where every time we look at him, it's, wait a minute, who's that? Oh yeah, that dude's that guy's a really good athlete. He's really big. He's just got a really good frame on him. And I feel like Jacob Lane is one of the guys where I catch myself doing that a lot, where it's, oh yeah, wait a second, that's Jacob Lane. Where, in the world of number changes, his stayed the same, but he's just one of those bodies where every time I look at him, it's, yeah, this dude is a really, really good athlete. And we've seen him get a couple of nice pass rushes off, whether he's lined up on the left side or the right side. And I'm excited to see what that guy is going to do, because as he continues to progress, I've got a bold take here. I think that he might end up pushing for the starting job by the time fall camp rolls around.
Interesting. See, I think I don't know if I would. I definitely don't totally disagree in terms of, I think long term he could be a starter. I think more or less, like if you think about what Javon Parker did last season, right, where it's like he could be a starter, but I think let's give him that one more year in the rotation, get him a little bit more reps. Because again, when Jacob Lane came in last year, yeah, he played in a significant amount of games, but it was always on third down, and it was always kind of in that one trick mindset. And again, that's not that he can't do more than that, but I think in terms of kind of staggering that development, that might be why he gets more playing time, but isn't necessarily a bona fide starter, even, let's just say, midway through the season.
So here's my argument, then. I'll just give you the other side of the coin. I want to preface this first part with, I love Maurice Himes. I think he's a fantastic kid. I love what he's doing, and I want to see him continue to take steps forward. He's already played more than Maurice Himes. Especially if you're taking special teams reps out of it, he's played more than Maurice Himes has. And I've been impressed with how flexible he is, how he's been able to be utilized all over the formation. And, when I look at him compared to Davis and Ward as well, and Lance too, he's longer, he's bigger, he's stronger, and he can set the edge as well as any of those guys, and probably better, honestly, than all 3 of them against the run. So I think that's kind of where this comes from, and where I'm giving him this slight edge, and I'm going to just make this bold prediction, because I just look at his entire facet of his game. And when we look at these 5, 6, 7 pass rushers that are going to be utilized on the outside, I look at all those guys and I said, there's going to be a pretty healthy rotation of them there. But when I look at who's going to be out there to stop the run, feels like Zach Durfee is just never going to come off the field. And that's just kind of what we've seen from him, just how committed he is to playing the run and how awesome he's been as a pass rusher, where he's not going to want to come off the field. And then just on the other side of the field, there's going to be a little bit of a rotation where we're going to see all those guys get shots and get opportunities. But it's all going to be about who sets themselves apart as a run defender. And I love Lance. I think Isaiah Ward and Russell Davis are fantastic players. And I love Maurice Himes as well, but it's going to come down to those 2 guys, Maurice Himes and Jacob Lane, who's going to stop the run better. And I just have this feeling that by the end of fall camp, and when these depth charts come out, that Jacob Lane might be on top of it for his ability against the run.
See, okay, that I agree with in terms of between those two. I just don't know necessarily when you factor in then where does Voigt slot in, and Durfee is. So Durfee's obviously one starter. So then who is the opposite starter, right?
Yeah.
So I don't disagree that he will be in the two deeps. I think he certainly has played his way into that, and as long as he doesn't take a step back in fall camp, right? And I think barring any unforeseen circumstances, right, I wouldn't be surprised if he's. I mean, he could be a significant contributor. I'm just not sure if he can do certain other things that would make him.
But that's why there's such a deep rotation.
Exactly, and I think that's why to your point though, like next year and then a couple years after that he'll be a starter, right? I think like next year he'll no doubt be a starter, and this is kind of his building block. You're like, hey, show us what you can do with this defense, right? We're going to give you X, Y, and Z to do. If you can do it, and then first of all, if he can do it, they're going to make him a starter. I will give you that. I think there's no question with the staff. They're not afraid to turn those young guys loose, and not just in special situations. So I think if he shows the staff by the end of September, hey, I can actually do 3 or 4 things and not just 1 or 2 or 3. Yeah, I think then he'll certainly because you can get flexible with Voigt, right? Because if Jacob Lane is doing 2 or 3 things, Voigt can either be up the middle or you can go 5D lineman, right? There's so many different things you can do with the versatility of Belichick's scheme. Again, I don't think they're going to go 5, but my point being, there's a lot of different things you can do, and that's a good problem to have.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We've got so much more fun stuff coming with spring practice, with the NFL draft, for all of it. So make sure you keep it right here on Locked On Huskies and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So please make sure to like the video, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. Please make sure to leave us a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. And please, if your audio only, leaves a 5-star review, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Wednesday.